Hey everyone, my name is Ram and welcome to Sprint Master. For any technical interview with big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Facebook, the interview questions can be broadly classified into three categories. Number one is the coding questions or the questions based on the data structures, and number two is behavioral questions or the questions based on your previous experience, and the third category is system designing. During the preparation for these interviews, many people spend more time with the coding questions and the behavioral questions. I understand that it is important for you to spend more time with the coding questions, but it is equally important for you to spend time to prepare for your system design interviews. Based on the level you are being interviewed for, the importance of system design interview comes into the play. For example, if you are interviewing for engineering level 1 position, the system design interview question they ask you might not be so ambiguous, and even if it is, the interviewer doesn't expect you to solve with every minute detail. But on the other hand, if you are applying for a principal engineer position or an SDM position or a TPM position, they expect you to solve this problem to the very minute detail, like what kind of a technology stack you are using, what are the trade-offs, and like why you choose this particular architecture versus the other, and what kind of alternatives have you thought about. All of these kind of things matter. Today I am going to give you 8 tips that I think will help your system design interview process go smooth. But before we do that, I want you to do me a quick favor by clicking that like button below so that YouTube can share this video with many people just like you. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, go ahead and click that red subscribe button below so that YouTube can let you know whenever I upload a new video. Almost all the major tech companies will have some level of system design interview questions in their interview process. So when you face such a question, you should be prepared and you should have a game plan to approach that question. In this video, I am going to give you the tips that can ease your system design interview process. Sit tight, grab a coffee, and let the learning fun begin. Tip number 1. Don't jump into any solution. Instead, ask clarifying questions before you jump into one. System design questions are usually ambiguous and the interviewer is trying to understand your thought process and he is trying to analyze how big you are thinking. For example, let us say your interview question might be like design a parking lot or design an e-commerce website. When you are asked such a question, you have to ask all the clarifying questions before you jump into a solution. For example, in this case, you can ask some questions like who are your customers and how are your customers going to interact with your system and how many customers are we going to serve and what is the expected latency of the system and what is the expected scale of the system, and are we going to deploy this at a particular location or are we going to deploy this globally. All of these kind of questions are really important before you start solving this problem. Ask these questions upfront. This can lead you to a good design which satisfies the customer's needs and ultimately satisfies your interviewer. Tip number 2. Treat your interviewer as your teammate and have a good communication with him. In your system design interview, think that your interviewer is your teammate and both of you are trying to solve a business problem with you leading the design. If you think of it that way, then you'll be much more comfortable as well as you can establish communication with your interviewer. This communication is key for you to excel in this system design interview, because if you have any questions or if you are making any assumptions, when you say it out loud to your teammate or your interviewer in this case, then your interviewer will be able to understand what kind of a thought process is going on, and if you have any questions, he might have answers to that and he will say that out. And if you are making any assumptions, he will understand that your design is based on this assumption and he may pose questions on like why you are making such an assumption that can drive your design to go in the right way, and ultimately you will excel in this system design interview. Tip number 3. Don't go too deep right away. After asking the right questions and gathering the information that you need, don't go deep right away into your design. Instead, focus on the major components that are in your system design. For example, let us say your system components will have like some kind of a UI and some kind of a backend and some kind of a database, and this UI interacts with the backend using some kind of a REST APIs in between, and this backend will communicate with your database to grab the data and store the data into the database. And for example, let us say you have some kind of a notification system to which you have to send the notifications. So this backend will send those notifications to that system which communicates with the end user. So when you lay out this kind of high level design, what will happen is your interviewer will understand like, okay, overall picture of this design is so and so, and if he is interested in one particular component of this system design, he can ask to go and elaborate more on that component. That way you will cover what the interviewer is asking for in that given time frame of 30 to 40 minutes. Obviously you cannot give every minute detail of all the systems that are interacting in this whole system design. Instead you can focus on what matters most, and that can help your interviewer to collect the data points that he is interested in. Tip number 4, focus on your strengths. Once you have the first level of breakdown, try to focus on the areas which you are more comfortable with or which are your core strengths. For example, if you are an UI engineer, you can focus more on the UI part of it, and if you are a database engineer, you can focus more on the database part of it. If you are unsure like where to start, I think the right way to start or solve this problem will be with the data models. So you have to get an understanding of like what kind of a data models that you are dealing with, and when you have this kind of a data models thought through, then you can design the REST APIs or any APIs that fills out these data models, and how you want to store these data models into the database determines which technologies you want to use for the database. I think the data models might be the starting point, and after that you can think of the APIs and you can think of the UI and the database. Everything comes into the place once you start at one point. Tip number 5, go deep on the areas in which your interviewer is most interested in. This tip is kind of a contradictory to the previous tip I have mentioned on focusing on your core strengths. If your interviewer is asking specific questions about a particular component, I think you have to go deep in that area rather than focusing on your core strengths and going deep on your core strengths. For example, if you are interested more in the UI piece and you want to go deep into the UI, but your interviewer is expecting you to answer more about the data models you are choosing, then I think it is important for you to answer that data models question first and give all the information that your interviewer is asking for. Ultimately, you want your interviewer to give a green signal for you to pass this interview, right? So when you are answering such questions, give the information that your interviewer is asking for. And once you give that information, before going deep again, ask him if the details are sufficient or not, and if he wants you to go even more deep. If he wants to go more deep, then give out more deep details. Otherwise, you can just skip that and you can go to the other sections or the other components and have that design solution put together. Tip number 6, try to break down your system design into multiple components or multiple services. When you are designing the backend, you have an option to have a single system that handles all the operations, or you can break down that system into multiple components based on their operations. For example, let us say you are building for online shopping. Then you can break down that whole system into multiple components, like one for orders and one for customer information like the shipping and the demographic details, and the third one for handling the payments, and the fourth component can be for tracking the orders. So when you have this kind of a components, then you can think of like if all of these components will write to the same database, or will they be writing to an individual database for each of the service. And then you can talk about how they are going to communicate, like for example, are they going to be communicating with the REST APIs, or are they be communicating based on the event driven mechanisms? When you put out all this kind of information to your interviewer, that will leave a strong impression of you on your interviewer, that you have considered enough details to break down the system, and that will help your interviewer understand that you are separating the components based on the areas of concern which can be scalable. Tip number 7, if you know which technology is the right choice there, say it out. Based on the requirements and based on your design, if you have a good technology choice that you want to go with, say it out. This can be something like what kind of a UI technology you want to use. For example, if it is a mobile app development, then are you going with a native app development, or are you going to use some kind of a technology which can be used cross platforms? Or it can be about your databases, like if you want to use NoSQL databases versus SQL databases, or it can be about your servers, if you prefer AWS Lambdas versus AWS ECS, some things like that. So if you know which technology might be a better fit for your design, then say it out. This can help your interviewer understand how good you are with the technologies and how well you know the pros and cons of each of these technologies. If you don't know all of these technologies, then don't worry about that. Forget it and just focus on your components and go detail about like what these components do. Tip number 8, practice. The final tip of the day is practice. This tip has nothing to do with the system design interview itself, but rather the preparation phase of your system design interview. Your design interview lasts for about 45 minutes, right? During this 45 minutes time frame, you have to ask all the clarifying questions, you have to come up with the requirements, you have to capture all the use cases, you have to come up with the design, you have to come up with the components, you have to come up with the APIs, you have to come up with the database. So there is many more pieces that are involved in this system design interview. When you don't have a proper practice for this system design interview, you might be missing one component or the other component, or you might be spending too much time on one component and might miss entirely on a particular component, which might lead to a bad conclusion about your case to your interviewer. So practice before the system design interview. You can do that by grabbing a friend and do a mock interview session with him, or you can pretend that there is an interviewer and you can start talking about your system design and try to capture your solution within that 45 minutes time frame and make sure that you are covering all the specific details that are required to excel in this system design interview. So practice, practice, practice. Okay, we are almost to the end of our discussion today. Finally, before we go, I want you to understand that these tech companies have a huge customer base. And for this customer base, they want to provide services which are highly available, highly scalable, and with very little latency. So can you imagine if you are waiting for a Google search to give back a list of results for 10 seconds? No, right? Because we are living in a fast-paced era. And in this fast-paced era, you want your results to be back within milliseconds, if not in like couple of seconds. If you are waiting for 10 seconds for that page to respond back to you, customers will get frustrated and they move on to the competitors. And ultimately, no one wants to lose their customer base, right? That is why these tech companies will ask you system design interview questions in their interview process. So this will help the company to understand like how well you are thinking and what is your thought process when you are posed with an ambiguous problem, and how you are designing your components, whether they can be scalable or not. If you are a fresher and you don't have much experience with building the systems that are scalable, don't worry. Your interviewer also knows that you are a fresher too, and he has a right expectation for you. Keep practicing and stick to the basics of the system design and follow the tips I have mentioned in this video that can help you to excel in your system design interview. I hope you like this video, and if you do, please click that like button below and share this video with your friends. If you have any questions or comments on this video, make sure you mention them in the comment section below. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, go ahead and click that red subscribe button below so that YouTube can notify you whenever I upload a new video. And finally, thanks for watching this video. This is Ram signing off.